thought I knew what it meant to be a good wife. I knew my husband's love language, I was loyal, we hung out all the time. The truth is, I was completely off track. I was doing what I thought was best, but I was missing the one thing that would make everything fall into places. And that was the biggest lesson I had to learn that completely transformed our marriage. So for the first 7 years of our marriage, I thought that being a great wife meant being structured and organized, being confident and decisive, and getting things done. Every personality trait that I embodied. What I didn't realize was that by controlling everything, I was actually making things more challenging in our marriage. And it wasn't until I let go of my own plans and started embracing God's vision for marriage that I finally saw my marriage truly transform. So today we're diving into understanding what submission really is and what it's not, and why God commands it, and practical ways to live it out, especially if you also tend to be the controlling type. So Titus 2 says, "The older women likewise, that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given too much wine, teachers of good things, that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed." So we are called to be obedient to our own husbands. Out of all the traits of a Titus 2 Women series, I can honestly say that this has been the most challenging for me. I never cared for homework in university, but before Micah and I got married, I did my homework. I knew how important submission was, and I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. So I watched every sermon I could find. I read what seemed like every book on the topic. I dissected every Bible passage on submission. And I wanted to know what I was getting myself into. I needed to be ready. But you know how we can study something all we want, and the real test comes out when we actually live it out? It's like prepping for a big competition. It doesn't matter how prepared I feel, the real deal comes out on the big day. On that day, I will know how much I practiced, how well I ate, and how much I slept. That's when I find out how prepared I actually was. And it felt exactly the same thing here. It didn't matter how prepared I felt that I was being obedient to my own husband. The real deal came out after we were married. On that day, I realized how not submissive I was. So before we dive into what submission is, let's start about what submission is not. Submission is not blind obedience. It's not about shutting off our brain and following orders without thought. God has never called us to obey sin. And biblical submission doesn't mean that we agree with everything without discernment. And submission is not silencing women or diminishing our worth. A wife is not a mindless follower. We are equal in Christ, created in God's image with wisdom and thought and opinions that matter. And a healthy marriage includes our voice and our input and our influence. Submission is not force. It's a willing act of trust in God's design. It's not about our husband controlling us or demanding obedience, because true biblical submission is the wife choosing to align ourselves with God's design for marriage, knowing that his ways bring peace and unity. It's a partnership where both husband and wife serve and love and respect each other, each fulfilling our very own God-given role so that marriage can thrive. Once I realized that submission wasn't about losing my voice or becoming a doormat, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I started to understand that God wasn't asking me to be passive or to set aside my brain. Submission is about trusting God's design for the family unit. It's rooted in love and trust. It allows me to respect Micah's role while still maintaining my own, because God created us equally with distinct roles. And when I finally embraced this, it opened my heart in ways that I hadn't expected before. And I was no longer caught up in the lie that submission meant silence or being inferior or less than. Instead, I was able to truly learn what God intended for me as a wife. When I would hear the word submission, I would cringe and think, here we go again, the famous S word where I'm being oppressed and losing my freedom as a woman. What I didn't know is that God commands this because he created structure in the family for our good. Just like anything in life needs leadership to function properly, so does a family. There are no two prime ministers in a country, or presidents for our American friends. There are no two CEOs in a company. And there's one leader in every structure, including the family unit. And that role, God created it for our husbands. For the longest time, I battled this. I'm not necessarily rebellious or anything, but I definitely want control in my life, or need. Thinking back, I've always struggled with authority. I moved out at 15 because I craved freedom. I talked back to authority. I didn't understand that there could be someone over me holding me accountable. I made final calls and decisions because I thought I knew best. I convinced myself that if I didn't take charge, things wouldn't get done properly. But what is properly? It wasn't that I didn't trust Micah to lead her family, because I do. I just had been doing everything on my own for so long that I thought I would keep on leading, because that's what I always did. There were a lot of prayers and tears and loud conversations with God, asking Him to change my heart because I couldn't do it on my own. How can I trust my husband to lead when I could lead myself? I end up finally realizing that it wasn't about Micah or even about me. It was about God. Being obedient to my husband is about trusting God. If I truly trusted God, then I would trust His design for a family. When I finally let go, when I stopped controlling everything and allowed Micah to step into the role that God has designed for him, it changed everything. Our home somehow was more peaceful. I somehow stopped being not kind. I felt more peaceful and more joyful and lighter. It had been almost like I'd been carrying this weight to constantly making sure everything was just right and okay and perfect. And suddenly I felt like I could actually rest in the fact that I didn't have to do it all, that I didn't need to have all the answers, that I could count on Micah to lead her family. It was the weirdest feeling, which is absolutely crazy to me, considering that I would have never thought that someone could ever lead me. And for the very first time in my life, I wasn't in charge. I could trust another human being to do things to the same standard that I would. And I know this is something that a lot of us are overcoming, wanting to submit to our husband but not knowing how. And I truly wish I could tell you, this is the moment that changed my life, and this is the one thing I did. But I don't know that there was one thing or one moment. I think God just worked in my heart. And I promise you, He worked His butt off to transform this hard heart. I don't know that it was overnight, but when I finally let go, I finally understood that submission is not following my husband like a puppy. It's about trusting God's design for a family. And in doing so, finding more peace and freedom and security than I've ever imagined possible. So it wasn't about that, about what I was losing. It was about what I was gaining. And when we trust Him and follow His design, we experience the freedom that we can't find by doing things our own way. When I was in the midst of learning to live out submission, I needed all the help that I could get. So I surrounded myself with lots of other women who walked this path before me. I devoured a lot of books and reread some of the books that I already had read. And I seriously did what I felt like everything to make our marriage thrive. Because let's face it, nobody wants an average marriage. We all want a passionate and thriving and fun marriage. And I was like, we're in this forever. So I may as well start figuring things out sooner than later. The first thing I did is to pray. Constantly. I prayed so often that I'm pretty sure God just got sick and tired of hearing me, that He went, fine, I'll teach you and change your heart to be submissive. And I knew I couldn't do it on my own. So there were days that I went to pray multiple times a day, asking God to help me surrender my need of control and to help me become the woman and the wife that He created me to be, so I can willingly support my husband to lead our family. I prayed for a marriage, I prayed for my heart, I prayed for all of it constantly. And I still prayed about it every day, because it can be so easy to revert back to our old ways if we don't renew our minds. And the next thing I did is to communicate respectfully. I've learned that being respectful goes a very long way, and nagging is not being respectful. Asking Micah rhetorical questions to show him that I was right is not being respectful. Telling him that I can do it if he's not going to do it is not respectful. The other thing I did is letting Micah make decisions. And that was actually one of the most challenging for me. Trusting him with the responsibility of decision making, especially when I had a different opinion, was something. This doesn't mean that I didn't share my thoughts or perspective, but I would remind myself that Micah has the final decision. And I just had to let go of the control and trusting that God has equipped him to make the right decisions. And if he screwed up, oh well, he'll do better next time. And we could be talking about submission for hours, because there is so much that I've learned on the topic and I'm still currently learning. And also because we have so many different opinions and experiences and perspectives to bring to the table. I'm by no means perfect at it. But if there's anything I can share, is that it's truly freeing to allow my husband to lead. When Micah was off work for 21 months, it was so freeing for me to allow him to lead our family into what financial situation he believed was best for us. He never took us back into debt. He never asked me to go back to work. And right now, we're in the midst of moving provinces, and it is so freeing for me to allow Micah to make the final decisions, trusting that God has equipped him to know how to lead a family well. Every decision that I don't make is an opportunity for God to show me his perfect design for the family unit. And it's not always easy, but it's absolutely worth it. So this was the final video of the Titus 2 Women series, and I absolutely love documenting everything I've been learning on this journey. If you missed any of the previous videos, make sure to check them out in the description.